So I'd like to call the January 25th Finance Committee meeting, 2018 Finance Committee meeting to order. Start off, is there any public comment? I think the only people here are people with business scheduled. Minutes in your packets. Yes. Okay.
And January 22nd was not in this packet, I believe.
Okay.
So don't worry about anything.
So we're not, thank you for, we're not worrying about any of the minutes. All right. Well, with that, we have the water company on our schedule up first. So welcome to the water company, to Mark. And who else is with you? So you've got a couple of commissioners.
And two commissioners.
Yep. Okay. Great. Mark, do you know everybody here?
I do, I think, yes.
Okay. Very good.
All right, I'll start with a quick review of 18 to see what goals we met. We laid out a bunch of them and pretty much made all of them. The water withdrawal permit is probably one of our biggest goals, and it still is a goal. It's not in our hands anymore. It's at the state level. So they're fine-tuning that as we speak. It's actually going to be a good thing that it's been delayed, because with these major subdivisions going on, we might have to revise that withdrawal number that we're basing it on. So that gives us a little more time. We did put in 2 new wells and removed our vacuum system in Wyers Valley and replaced them with 2 submersible wells, which are much more efficient. We'll save a lot on electrical costs. Those went online in May, so we use those all summer. We did develop and are still continuing to develop our 10-year capital plan, and we'll revise that as needed, but it's an ongoing thing. We do have a base to work off of, and it gets switched around as we work with other departments and find out what's going on in the town. If sewer's going down a certain area that we have in the future, we're able to team up with them and start doing more work together. I think a good example was in town. We conquered Farmer Street with the sewer department and the water department. We went as a team, and in one time, both got everything done, seal up the road, and move on. So hopefully there'll be more of that happening. We did finish the phase 2 of our fire hydrant program. There's 3 phases to that. We have about 95% of our hydrants have now been updated, which is great for fire flow and fire protection for the town itself. We're trying to get to the point of having no hydrants older than 30 years. Once you get back to that age, the orifices are much smaller, so the flow is restricted. So as you get newer hydrants, the flow increases for better fire protection. We do now have an in-house certified procurement officer. I think I'm going to go do that next. As soon as the class schedule comes out, I think we need to have more of those in the house. So
was that just somebody who was already on your staff, I assume?
Yeah. Yeah. She's been trained. So I know I'm gonna take the class, and we might make 1 or 2 other people go as well. We're just waiting for the schedule to come out for those classes. And the other thing we're waiting on, which is at the state level, is the last goal here when we talked about last year about merging Syosconset and Wannacomet Water. That is at the State House level, waiting for a 3rd committee review. It's kind of on a holding pattern right now, and we'll see where that goes, but we'll have more information on that hopefully soon. And if we moved into 19, I carried the same water audit as the main goal for this year, because that is really, really important to what we have to do. That's going to tell us how much we can pump per day. And those calculations, as we're all feeling the growth the last 2 or 3 years, it's kind of a critical number. So we've been pushing the state, and they're going as fast as they can. We're also in the middle of getting a leak detection survey done, which will help with a system-wide water audit. The leak survey will help us with the water audit to determine unaccounted for water and waste, we can improve the system so we're not wasting water, find better ways to run it. And those two lead into a system-wide rate and alternative rate structure study. We've talked to a few different companies about rate studies and structure rate studies. And part of that, they would like this information first, like the leak survey, to find out the condition of the system, to find out what its capital needs really are. So we have to complete those two in 19 to move forward with the anything to do with a rate study.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
On leaks.
Yep.
It seems to me that the last couple of years, Bob used to talk about how the radio metering of all the residences and businesses has given you such great intelligence as
Yes.
to when there was a leak or when a house
So
had a water break.
we can tell within minutes of when the leak happened, and it notifies us, so they'll be on our software in the morning when you come in, you can check, or if I'm in there at night, I can check, and there'll be an alarm on that meter, so you'll know if it's leaking.
So my question is, given that the endpoints of so much of the system is on these radio meters,
Yep.
you have other evidence that leads you to believe that there are leaks sort of in the system in general, or?
Well, we have a single digit unaccounted for, so which is very good. The state is amazed anytime you're under 10%. I think we're in the 4 to 5% range right now. So, but to us, since this is a sole source aquifer, I truly believe that I would like it to be, I know it can never be 0, but I would like it to be 1 or 2. And we have to really save what we have. I mean, and the meters are a big help to that, and they've helped us reduce that because we're not losing that water unaccounted in a leak. We can catch it. So, and there are different things we can do. There's different things that you can put on fire hydrants to help detect main leaks, and we're looking into that as well. So once we get those two done, it'll be right into a rate survey and a rate study. Again, develop and implement. We've been working with Brian and his team at the finance department, and they've been a great help with all of this, and also with the merger, Wisconsin and Wannacomet. So we'll spend more time with them, trying to consolidate both budgets, and instead of doing 2, at some point, if there is a merger, we would just do 1.
So that's what the comment's in reference to, is putting the 2 together, not
Right. So there was a general idea in previous years to try to get it done.
Okay.
It's at the state level. They've had some questions about it, and they're going through all of that now. It's been a long process.
Thank you.
So some major changes that have happened from last year to this year, we increased our staff by 2. We have 2 new young local utility guys now working for us. So it's a total of 12 employees at Wannacomet. I think it was that when I started 17 or 18 years ago. It dropped down quite a bit less than that. Now we're back up to that. They were desperately needed. Not only do we have not to talk bad about aging workforce, but we have a few guys that are close to the end. And we want to be prepared for when they do leave, that we have guys trained and in place ready to go. The water rates are going to stay consistent. We have no intention of increasing any water rates for 2019. And some key issues looking forward were the Water Management Act, which has to do with our water withdrawal permit. That's really going to dictate how we operate and how much we can operate, how much we can pump. So just recently, the Mass DEP has changed us from a distribution 2 to a distribution 3 system. They moved us up the scale based on summer population, which they've never done. For some reason, our numbers in the summer are getting so big, and our summer season seems to be, in their eyes, extending further into shoulder seasons. So we are now a 3. What that means for us is I've already gone and gotten my D3 license, so all the operators that we have working for us now are currently Operator 2 license. It's very similar to a plumbing license. You have to go to class hours and maintain those hours before you can go sit for the exam. So there is an increase in our budget. One of the line items that you'll see for travel, that's what that's for. We are actively looking to see if we can do it here. For me to send, there's 5 guys that have to go do it. And if you add up a 15-week course schedule where the guy has to rent a car, stay in a hotel room, per diem, pay for the class, it's about $5,000 a guy. So I've been talking with some private teaching companies that come down and do training, and it would probably be cheaper for us to put somebody up here one day a week than send everybody off island. So hopefully we can knock that number down. And then it's still ongoing. You know, Heidi and I kind of taken over for Bob when he retired. It's been about 9 months now. We're not learning as we go, but we are learning and learning the system. And those are big shoes to fill, and we're doing the best we can.
Did you have to call him much?
I've called him a few times. He can hear me. No, I've called him with some questions. Yeah.
Question. How many hookups did you have this year?
About 150.
So that was for 2017?
Correct.
And what are you anticipating for 2018?
2018, I think we're going to be around the same number or a little more. That's where it gets really tricky because these massive subdivisions, we carried a little extra, or we didn't carry as much in the 19 budget as we did in the 18 budget for new service connections or new water fees, because we don't know when they're going to happen. We usually do over 100 normal everyday business every year with normal sustained growth. The way we've been seeing it now, we just keep the inventory, but we don't know. We have a major list of subdivisions. I know you guys are all aware of them, not just the big ones, the smaller ones that are 10 and 15, 17 houses. They're popping up everywhere. Over on Hooper Farm, you had one lot that is now 7 dwellings. There was always 1 meter there for 45 years. Now there's 7 meters there. And the neighbor's going to do the same thing. So for us to try to put a number on that, it's really the best guess we can go with. I think we projected 200, but all it would take is one of these bigger subdivisions to really get cranking, and then that number's obviously going to change.
So with these subdivisions, larger subdivisions coming online and with a withdrawal permit discussions going on with the state, what, are you going to come crashing into some limit?
No, I don't think so.
As Noni will remind me, we have plenty of water, but...
We do, and fortunately, we've spent money over the years on doing groundwater investigations and geophysics to define our aquifer, and there's more money in this budget, again, for 19. It's ongoing. We're trying to map the entire island. We've made, of course, we did Wannacomet's direct zone 2 first, and now we're moving outside of that. In the last study, they did find some saltwater intrusion in Nantucket. That's the first place we found it. So we have enough information to where I don't think the state would say that put a moratorium on connections. What they would do is we would have to prove through science that we have enough water and responsible about it. We'd have to change the way we irrigate. Maybe an on-off. This side of town is on a Tuesday, this side is on a Wednesday. We'd have to put some outside water use restrictions first before we ever came to that. But I think we have enough scientific evidence to say we have enough water down there. It's not really the supply of water, it's more the mechanics of getting it out. The system has about 5 million in storage between the 2 tanks and all the pipe. So at any one time right now, there's 5 million gallons out there to use. It's just how fast that's getting used. So even with the 2 new wells, we projected in this type of growth. We should be okay. But that was during the Richmond Group development where we came up with those ideas, and we did enough to cover it, not knowing that there was going to be 62 or 3 apartments right outside and 156 down the road, and we're just not used to seeing these kind of numbers come in, and we need to talk with DEP about it. But I think we'll be okay even with those numbers. We're just going to have to find better ways to get the water out.
And for example, what would be a better way to get the water out?
More efficient pumping, replacing older water mains with bigger pipe, some old leaky water mains, and if we do replace those on our capital plan, instead of replacing an 8-inch with an 8-inch, make it a 12-inch to carry more volume.
Great. You want to walk us through what key changes are scheduled for this year?
Budgetary changes?
Yeah.
The major changes, really, even though we added 2 people, you notice that our salary didn't increase that much. I think it was 1%. The way we restructured and moved people up in the company. A lot of the larger changes came in professional services, which has to do with the groundwater investigation that I was talking about, the ongoing working with the USGS. They used to be much cheaper, but over the years they've lost a lot of their funding. So what we used to get for $10,000 or $12,000 is costing us about $100,000. So that increase in that was for the ongoing services there. The travel increase was another one that bumped up for the training. And then we also increased our material supply. We don't want to get in a situation where if we do need to put in a bunch of services, that they're waiting on product, we want to have it here in stock. And what we just went through the last cold snap, we ended up replacing a lot of pieces and parts in that. So we got to replenish our inventory and make sure we have a good supply to meet whatever needs to be done. This year's budget is actually less than the 18 budget.
What's in your other line?
The other line is a whole bunch of single line items that it can be everything from vehicle maintenance, equipment and tool supplies, different tap machines, like during the sewer issue in town, we gave Robert Auer Company our tap machine to make a tap machine and make that bypass. Well, now we got to buy a new tap machine. We're not going to use that on water.
That's a good thing.
So there's a lot of other things. Our budget probably has, I don't know how many lines, Heidi, 120 or so different line items. So everything from office supplies and small things are into that other.
On the capital expenditures, the water main replacement, $3.5 million.
Yep.
Water tank maintenance, that's under 700. Are those both going to be debt financed, or?
We've been talking with the commission about doing maybe some combination of using some retained earnings for that. We're also talking about, since we're a little behind in starting 18's winter project this year, what we had proposed, it's probably going to flow into next winter once we get started. So we might be in a situation where the 3.5, the whole 3.5 might not be needed for 19. We got to do a little more investigating, a little more engineering to determine if we're going to get to the point where we're going to finish that project in that year. the tank maintenance is the one. If we were going to dip into the retained earnings, and the commission feels strongly about having that as a backup, as we all saw a few weeks ago, if something major happens, it's kind of nice to have some backup there. But they're also willing to discuss using some of that on a project like a tank. The ultimate goal would be to get like the tank maintenance be a maintenance operational thing, operational budget. Anything to do with the tanks. We've got them built, we've got them together. Now it's our job to maintain them and build that into the budget. Once we get this spot repair taken care of and everything touched up, my goal would be in 2020, a maintenance program starts for all the tanks, Sconset and the two in town. All 3 water towers would be a yearly thing. That's the only way we're going to make them survive, is we got to put money into them on a yearly basis, and it could be operational money, and save the capital for pipe projects.
Other questions? Go ahead, keep going.
Status of the new office building?
They're moving along pretty well. Like every building, there's hiccups here and there with weather and different delays, but they're looking like sometime in March would be a move-in date, and it's gone pretty well.
And I don't know whether you could remind me of this, but it's based on the numbers here, you got about $3.3 million in retained earnings. Mm-hmm. As I remember, a big chunk of that was meant to go to pay for the building, or
1.5.
1.5 of that's for the building.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
I have a few questions. Last year, there was a meter tech position
Yes.
approved. Is that, and that was the only position that, we had a lot of back and forth on that. Is that intended to be filled?
It is with one of the 2 people that we have now. One, I called them both utility men, but one, they're both going to be learning the meter tech position.
Are you, okay, that's fine. Are you planning on adding an additional staff
No.
person? Okay,
No.
all right. So thank you. The other thing and this is a question, perhaps addressed to the commissioners. The history is that your expenses have significantly underrun your revenue. And if looking at the sheet that we have here, there's a 2018, I would assume, projection of a net earnings of $1.7 million. If those numbers are accurate, it generates about a 26% profit margin in the local utility. And a year ago, we asked that a rate study be done because of what I think appeared to many people here, that there was an excessive amount, in our view, an excessive amount of net earnings being generated for a utility, and that given the large amount, and if it's all being generated out of hookups, I guess that's one thing, but if it's coming off the backs of the ratepayer, who by and large isn't represented at town meeting, we were very interested in understanding where the commission and the water companies were going with the accumulation of a large amount of retained earnings, which feeds into Joe's question, which is, with this amount of retained earnings, using some of that for capital rather than continuing to borrow for projects that clearly could fit underneath the
Right, and we're very open to looking into that.
So you indicated that you were talking to some people about a rate study?
We have been, and we want to get that done, but to do it properly, see, a rate study, well, first you have to have the condition of the system to find out what needs to get done to the system to get it to the best of its ability.
Right, and that was on your set of objectives last year.
Right. And we've done quite a bit of that. We're just finishing up the leak survey is out to bid now. We should have it back within a few weeks. That'll be completed before spring, the leak survey. That's the last piece we're waiting for.
So when a target for starting a rate study, July, August, September?
I would say in the summer, yeah.
And
Yeah.
at the time, there was some discussion about combining it with David Gray's operation so that there was they weren't done separately, but they were
Yes.
combined. Is that the discussion, or am I correct in understanding David's already got one underway?
David's got one underway. He has there was quite a big price difference between the people he's using and the people we have talked to, like triple. So
Whose was triple?
sewer departments we thought was a very high quote. And there may be more, I'm not familiar with sewer and sewer rate studies, there may be more involved
More
with
complexity.
doing it. But we've gone kind of separated from him on that.
In the 1.7 million, how that you made over the budget, how much of that is new hookups? Because I do remember that last year, their projection was 107. And
Yeah.
You're saying it's 150.
Well, we did like 150 to 160 last year, so a fair amount of that is, a big chunk is that.
It's about 600.
But that, at some point that we all
Net earnings
understand.
coming from
No,
hookups?
just from
Coming from
the revenue from
hookups.
Yeah.
hookups. I guess my questions, if I can, I don't think my mic's on. Over the past 4 years, that revenue has increased by 35%. We've kept our rates, and I'd ask the commissioners, we've kept our rates for how many years? Have they been $4 per?
The last rate increase was in March of 2016.
Okay. So in looking at that increase, and if I look at rain data, our rainfall on average is 41 inches a year on Nantucket, and we've been above and beyond that the last 2 years. So I would look at water consumption saying, well, it's not really that we're low on rain, which irrigates
Right.
normally. But I also look at that percentage on how revenue, and as David was referring to revenues and expenses, it's averaged on over 5 years, 20%. Has been a big anomaly last year. And I think it's more of the process of formulating a budget. We overperform. We undercut our revenue budget-wise, and we overperform each and every year. We over-budget expenses, and we underspend our expenses. So we're, really, I think, in a nutshell, I look at it as a simple person. You could afford to decrease your water rate by 15 to 20% and still produce a balanced actual year end. I don't care about the budget, because budget's an exhibit. But if we're using budget to quantify and justify our rate of water, and we never spend the expenses, and it's pretty historical. It's almost each and every year. There was a little blip between 14 and 15 where it wasn't as big. And I think the commissioners, you should really look at, I've always said, we've overcharged for water. We show our expenses as budget very high, but yet we always overachieve. We don't spend anywhere close to that. So our variance at 1.7 plus Sasconset, which is 300,000, that's 2 million. We probably pretty much have put about 60% of our water to use this fiscal year, and I think currently our variance is at 1.112. We're going to surpass even last year's variance. So I continue to see that variance grow and grow and grow, and our retained earnings grow. And then there's prioritization of how those retained earnings are spent, and that's just my biased opinion. I guess we would put more effort into a building for our employees than our aged water mains, but that's just me. So I think that, there's a water rate study that's been asked for years and years and years, and it hasn't been provided to us, because maybe it validates, and I think it's your duty as commissioners to validate whether your rates are too high or they're accurate.
I think you're not going to like the outcome of the rate study.
That's good.
We're at the bottom third of the Commonwealth, and we operate in the most expensive place.
But
And
I know a little bit.
I already
about
know what the rates are.
We don't have stones in the way. We don't have
No.
obstacles in the way in comparison to the majority of the municipalities on the mainland. So it's a lot of wells, a lot of running pipe.
Yep.
It's not rocket science.
No. No, I agree.
So I would be remiss if I didn't continue to say that. I've had problems with specific line items over the past years, which I thought, how dare we spend monies like that? And in reality, those expenses were borne by the people paying for the water. And I think the commissioners have to realize that, you represent everyone who pulls water out of the wells. So,
Yeah. We're new to the position. I'm new to the position, learning, going through first real budget that I've taken on. So we'll continue to grow and learn, and I understand your concerns.
But I guess I would ask, from a finance, and Brian, not to put you on the spot like I do every meeting. From this, we're sitting here putting our time and thought. I know all of us are doing that. If we didn't make some sort of recommendation to that extent of the overinflated or underinflated revenue and the overinflated expense, I'd like to make a motion that we cut the operating expense by $800,000 and then match that to your revenue line. Go backwards. I'm not going to make that motion because I just want to at least put it out, and maybe the commission can think about it at their next meeting. Because that's what I feel. I feel that our rate of water there's 15% of fat that falls to the bottom line every year. It's not the largest utility bill that we pay, but it should be not where it is.
I understand your concerns. We can discuss that with the commission.
Yeah, it's a philosophical question as to, should a utility that's owned by a municipality basically run above break even, enough money so that it can maintain, do its repairs and maintenance, or, to some extent, it looks like it continues to be run as much like a private utility as it once was. Mm-hmm. And if that were the case, it would be subject to DPU hearings, and you wouldn't be getting the profit margins that are there. And I think we've looked at this now for a few years. We generally have the same kinds of comments, and we would just absolutely urge the commissioners, and because it's not.
Oh, I know.
From an operational perspective, we would urge the commissioners to look at this, and at some point, and it may be next year, we'll get up and just say the finance committee is having a hard time approving the budget. Let the voters hear that and understand that. So we certainly don't want to get there, but we really wish you guys would, look at this seriously. To run, a $1.7 million net income on a municipally owned utility just seems like it's out of whack. So.
It may seem high, but we're literally one bad day away from spending $1 million in a pump station in a heartbeat. If we lose a motor control center or a pump, that's $1 million to replace. If we don't have that savings there, how do we replace it? I'm talking emergency type situations.
I get it, and I'm contemplating.
And I understand what you guys are saying. I really do. I do.
Predictive maintenance, and there's lots of ways to make sure that doesn't happen. But that's you run the operation, Curly. It's just I think you've heard what Peter said. I think you've heard. I think Joanne. This represents our feeling.
No, I appreciate it. I do.
So, Alan? Did you have comments you wanted to make?
I would love to comment if I may.
We would love to hear from you.
I certainly do hear your argument as far as the income and so on. I've always thought of the water company, and this is my 6th year. I'm running for another term. I've always thought of the water company as being one of the most efficiently run organizations in town government. And I do have some familiarity with some of the other operations of the town government. In terms of the retained earnings that we maintain, that we have in the budget before you here. As Mark said, we're one disaster away from having a huge expense. And this is something that, certainly in the 6 years that I've served on the commission, that we've been aware of. And that's why the retained earnings that we've maintained over the year, we see that as an account. As Mark says, we do have among the lowest water rates in the whole Commonwealth. And we do operate in one of the most expensive areas. Plus, we have a first-class system. We have our SCADA. All our meters are read in the office, as Mark described earlier. We have a very talented and small group of people to run our operation. Anytime there's been a situation that the town has been involved with, we've been directly involved with the town in terms of assisting the town with surveying equipment, with all the other equipment, and the working together with the other town departments. Now, we are an enterprise account, and I think that that's one of the differences. We are not a town, we're not like the DPW, let's say. We're not under the management of the town directly. We are responsible, obviously. We're a part of the town, but I think that that in part accounts for why we, or at least me, speaking for myself as one of the three commissioners, feel that it's important that we retain the level of retained earnings that we do. So.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Steve?
Alan, maybe you know the answer, or maybe Brian. What is the actual level of, or what's the amount of certified retained earnings? Because I see the number here is 2.639. That's the same number that we saw in the last budget. It was certified as of July 1st, 2016.
I think it's actually 2.3.
You have a sheet that says there's a correction there.
Okay, so we went from 2.6 in July 1st, 2016 to 2.3 this year.
Because they took out $1.5 million, right?
I see.
No, it's like 300,000.
No,
2.6 to
you'd,
2.3.
You'd have to take out
Oh,
from
from that.
the 1.7 profit. I see.
Yep.
Okay. So what is the number? You know, the town has guidelines that it tries to adhere to in terms of the percentage of its operating budget that it sets aside as reserves. What's the goal that you all have in terms of? You've mentioned a few times it's, you know, you're a bad day away, one bad day away from spending $1 million. Is that the number you think you need to get to?
Over the years, we've had different amounts. That amount has fluctuated depending on the projects that we had lined up. Obviously, when we're doing some major sewer work, we want to be sure that we have the equipment and that sort of thing. We plan in advance for that by building up our retained earnings. So that number has varied over the years. Currently, as they pointed out, it is $2.3 million. I feel that that's a comfortable amount.
Well,
it's not
sounds comfortable, but what is the number that you need to prevent, catastrophic circumstances based on that bad day? You know, are you comfortable at $1 million, or does it need to be 2.3?
It would vary. It's going to vary depending on what's coming up. We're looking at an incredible build-out like we've never seen on this island with connections and this sort of thing. We're a public health agency. If we have a problem anywhere in our system, it is a problem. It's like the sewer system. We want to be prepared for anything that might happen. And that means essentially having the reserves so that we don't have to fumble around and try and bring funds together to address problems. Again, we do a lot of advanced planning. The planning that we do as far as replacing the sewer lines, the water lines, the fire hydrants, and the other capital the other expenses that we have, the maintenance of our system, we want to be sure we have enough money on hand to deal with those. And so we do put that into our retained earnings as we go along.
Okay. So going into fiscal year 2020, what's the number that you hope to have?
I would just be pulling a number out of the air without talking with Heidi and Mark before, just coming up before you here. I don't know what that number is going to be in 2020.
Well, we don't know what it's going to be, but, I mean, you should have some target. That's, I assume, what you're using when you put these budgets together.
Well, we don't have a crystal ball, and what we do have is an analysis of the future build-out, what the future needs of the program are going to be. We also do extensive maintenance on our system as well, and you've heard the things that we've undertaken over the last few years in terms of improving the system and so on. Again, I don't think that we have been irresponsible at all in terms of the retained earnings that we have maintained in that account, and it has varied over the years. I would much rather have that, I hate to call it a cushion, but essentially that's what the retained earnings are. We don't just sort of put that money aside and say, well, what are we going to do with it? We plan ahead. We're looking for the next 2 or we're looking longer than that ahead.
Right. I see here that you have a 10-year capital program underway,
right.
A water
Exactly.
audit, a system-wide leak survey, an evaluation of the rate structure. But all of these are the priorities also from last year. So we have, as Peter and David pointed out, we have a history of a balanced budget turning into a sizable profit. And I hear and I understand why the commission feels it's necessary to maintain a healthy balance in their retained earnings. But I don't know and I don't see here or hear what that number needs to be. So back to the rate study. Okay, it's going to happen soon, but how would you adjust the rates even when you get the rate study back? Well, when you get those results, if you don't, have the information of what level you need in that fund.
Well, I would disagree. I would say that, in fact, as we look forward, as we look through the items that are in our capital projections, and again, those are numbers that we're trying to guesstimate based on the zoning changes, based on the real estate market, based on any number of factors that have impact directly on the service that we provide. As I can't just pick out a number for you for what we're going to need in 2020, if that's what you're asking for.
I suppose it is. So you need a comfortable number, but there's no way to put a finer point on it than to say 2.3 is good for this year.
Well, if I could...
Because you asked Wisconsin too.
Right.
If I could project into the future...
I mean, isn't that what the priorities were last year? I mean, every item on this list of priorities, which is, without exception, the same priorities that we have for this year, is about projecting into the future.
Well, I'm really not sure quite what you're getting
what I'm saying
at,
is,
what your point is.
Projecting into the future is what the commission's supposed to be doing, is the purpose of this exercise and this discussion. So,
well, exactly, and that's why we have the retained earnings, as I say. That's.
But we don't know what the level of retained earnings should be, because, I mean, you've mentioned a crystal ball and not being able to look into the future. I understand we can't predict, to the day, maybe even to the year, when a piece of equipment might fail, or how many new connections you're going to have, or what the rainfall is going to be. And that's why you end up with a profit at the end of every year. But, last year, the balanced budget that you came to us with turned into $1.7 million in net earnings. That's a lot of cushion. You did spend 1.5 on a new building. You don't need to spend 1.5 on a new building this year. if you get, even half of the net earnings in fiscal year 18 that you got, or 19 that you got in 18, you'll be sitting on $3.5 million in retained earnings. So I'm asking, is 3.5 the number that you need? Is 2.3 comfortable? Who knows what that number is before you can adjust your budget?
Well, I would say from a budgeting point of view, and again, I'm trying to focus in on what your question is here. First of all, I don't see it as profit. I mean, that money that's in the retained earnings is not...
You call it net earnings or you call it profit.
In municipal finance, retained earnings is profit.
Well, yeah, but that money is not, when I think of profit, I think, oh, great, I can go out and buy a new whatever I want. And that's that's not, if you look carefully at the water company, the operations, our expenses over the years, that's not at all what we do.
Well, last year we heard from Bob and from the commission that, in essence, the retained earnings were savings that you all accumulated to spend however you wished. So I think in that respect, retained earnings are exactly profit.
That money is ultimately going to be used for whatever needs to uphold the system.
Right. I am also not sure why for the 2019 budget, when you are projecting 150 to 200 new hookups and what you came in at almost 6.5 for the actual in 2018, that you wouldn't budget for what you're going to make. You know you're going to make that.
You know you're going to make a third of it even, but if you put a third of that, the revenue is going to be much higher than what.
But I think it's misleading, right? And it's not you're not people are not able to see that money flow through because you're presenting a budget that's balanced when in fact you're going to make more money than you're going to spend, and we know this sitting here right now.
Well, okay, I'm really not quite sure what the point is here. Would your recommendation be that we lower
them
the
as close to actual as
we not put money away, and then if we do have some issue in the future that we find some other way to...
No, I don't think anyone is suggesting that. I think that if you create a budget, just as all the other departments do, they actually project what their revenues are going to be or what their expenses are going to be, and they live as close to that number as possible. But you are on purpose not reporting your actual revenue.
Well, they're reporting the revenue, but they're not projecting
they're
what's
not
likely to be the
projecting when
actuals.
you know if you're going to get between 150 and 200 hookups, you're going to come close to the $6.5 million. Or, as Peter said, if it's $650,000, put $650,000 on the 5.7, and show the money coming through. That's, I mean,
right,
that's
and then justify to say, the
that.
comfortable amount of retained earnings is $3 million, and that's what we're hoping to get at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But if that's not the purpose of this budget, then I don't know why the numbers are what they are, because we know that these aren't going to be close to the actuals.
And I also think it's completely reasonable for there to be a cushion, as you're saying, for an emergency, but say what the cushion is, right? If it's $3 million, if it's $3.5 million, then say what that number is.
Well, I would say that's sort of what we do by citing the retained earnings, but...
But,
no, no,
really.
all right. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not an accountant, so, in terms of putting these numbers back and forth, so.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Peter,
I just want to make sure that's said before we wrap the conversation. Well, I think this is a very worthwhile topic for the Finance Committee, and the rates and the budgeting here is definitely a worthwhile conversation, particularly when it happens year after year after year. But it's also not lost on me that we wouldn't have the luxury of this conversation if this thing wasn't incredibly efficiently run, if what Mark is saying about rates. And so I just want to make sure we don't leave this without congratulating the committee and the operations of the operations side of this, that you're able to create these kind of results. Because one way you can clear this up quite easily is if Mark would just spend another $1.7 million a year, then we wouldn't have to have this conversation. I'm not suggesting that's the right thing. I'm suggesting that they're doing very well in managing that part of the business. Not to diminish any of the other parts of this.
It's a credit to you all and to the community that we have the water system that we have. That's not an issue. It certainly, I hope you didn't take that from what I said. You all do a great job. The question is, what's the appropriate amount of, if we don't want to call it profit, what's the appropriate amount of net earnings? What's the justification for the amount of money that we keep in that retained earnings fund? That's the discussion that I'm, trying to have, nothing else.
All right, well, I assure you the commission will, at our very next meeting, will take a very close look at this issue, and we'll work with Heidi and with Mark and with Brian to come up, to understand where you're coming from so we can better address your concerns. How's that?
One last point to build on Joanna's point, Alan, is probably a more accurate revenue number for 2019, because clearly, there's a huge gap between what you're coming in for 2018, and so therefore it's unlikely that your revenue will only be $5.7 million in 2019. So that number is understated, I would suggest, just from the conversation we've just had.
Well, and it's unlikely that the expenses are going to be 5.7. They're probably going to be
Yeah,
$1 million less than that.
So, yeah, exactly. And then moving on to the expense line. So the transparency is important for understanding that the numbers as they're created are reflective of what's happening. And to Chris's point, it is good news. It is an efficiently run organization, and Mark, credit to you and your team for keeping expenses in check and doing a good job on it. So let everyone know what it is, so that in a clear way that everybody can then appropriately say, good job, and let's have some more, let's be closer to actuals, right? Let's be closer,
Gotcha.
More transparent.
More transparent, closer to actuals.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
point.
Go ahead.
I guess, Alan, maybe much more of an accounting question to Heidi and/or Brian, but is there a reason why I know we're not transparent because we show a balanced budget. We've showed a balanced budget ever since I've been involved. Is there a reason, accounting-wise, why we don't show something closer to reality? What's the reason? From an accounting standpoint, not you.
Sit down.
But don't go, Alan, don't go away, though, Alan.
Okay.
Well, I think part of the problem we have is trying to guess how many connections there are going to be.
Well, I would say, if I can help maybe a little bit on accounting, because I have a little background, there are variables. We know budgets are a practice, but if we got that revenue closer to reality, and you can see it. You can see it when you look at your previous years, and you get your expenses closer to reality, and you miss it by a little, well, big deal. You got $2.3 million in retained earnings. It's not a revolver, but you've got some parachute. And I think to get transparent, you're going to get closer to reality, and you're going to say to your ratepayer, we need to charge you what we charge for this retained earnings because we don't feel comfortable with our operation. That's one way to do it. But accounting-wise, why do we show something that we've never accomplished, a balanced budget?
Right.
Why? Accounting-wise, not logic, not philosophical. Can anyone answer that question? Is there some sort of methodology we have to obtain to hit a certain level of a balanced budget to get approved somewhere up in the State House? What's the reason?
No,
I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question.
I don't know.
No one's answering the question.
We can work to do a better job.
I'm almost,
be more transparent and work to be
as I
closer
said,
on
Mark,
these numbers.
And I'll echo Stephen,
Yeah.
knowing your world
Yeah.
and having lived in it, you do a phenomenal job. Not a great job, a phenomenal job. The water's always on when I want it.
Yep.
But I think from accounting and then that whole process of setting rates, I mean, Alan or Lonnie, we could lower the rate tomorrow if we wanted. And if our retained earnings went crazy, we could jack up the rate. I don't want to follow a bouncing ball, but it seems like we've been overpaying for, well, at least from 2016 or even before. So it just to me, it seems like that transparency of showing us a balanced budget is laughable.
Okay, I understand.
So I guess the summary here, I guess what we'd like to ask of you and your team and the commission are a couple of things. We would like to see a realistic budget reflected on the revenue line and on the expense line. And, if that results in, $1.7 million worth of net earnings or whatever, so be it. The second thing we'd like to ask of the commission is that you actually set a policy and establish a dollar amount. Maybe it's a percentage of your expenses. Right now, if you keep going the way you are, you're going to have a 1 year's worth of expenses in retained earnings, which strikes me as being probably excessive. But we would like, I think we would all like to see the commission come up with a written policy as to what your retained earnings number is going to be and what you're going to shoot for. And I think the third thing is that I certainly would appreciate if on the smaller items you don't capitalize them and borrow money for them. So if you're going to do the tank maintenance for $655,000, do it out of retained earnings. Please don't go and borrow more money. I think the borrowings ought to be for, putting pipe into the ground and some of your bigger capital investments that you've got to make where they're going to last for a long time and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Is that fairly
Yes.
reflect?
That's the direction we are going. We're trying to get that way. So more of this is in operations.
And I think if you do that, and I would just implore you, the commission, that we're not here next year asking the same questions. I guess that's the final
Okay.
comment.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to talk about Sconset highlights, or are we okay? Where else at Wisconsin? Do you have a question, Chris?
Only if there are any issues that Mark wants to point out real.
There's no real changes. It's
Okay.
no employees out there, no.
Right.
You want to talk about the retained earnings at all?
No, I think they're good in Wisconsin.
They have 10 million.
Great. Mark, thanks very much.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can we sneak the county in for next, so that the registrar can leave
Yes.
by chance?
That would
Is
be.
that possible?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to take a long time. No, is that all right with you guys? I don't think this is going to take very long on the county budget, based on what I saw last night. Okay, the airport's fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Nolan. I appreciate that. Hopefully this won't take a long time. So last night, the Board of County Commissioners adopted the county budget, and I'll just briefly take you through it, which is in your packet. There are two agencies within the county that operate within that county budget: county administration and the registry of deeds, which comprise deeds, excise, and administration. The main sources of revenue for the county are the town assessment, deeds, excise, recording fees, corrections, deeds, excise, which all go to pay a portion of the debt service for the public safety facility, and if need be, in certain circumstances, the use of registry of deeds, excise fund balance, and/or the county fund balance. Consistent with prior years, because we haven't gotten to a situation where we need to raise the county assessment from the county to the town, we're recommending $170,201. We're projecting $446,000 in deeds excise receipts between county administration and registry of deeds, recording fees of $171,500, and then the $250 for corrections, deeds, excise, which, if we meet all these projections, will bring in $1,037,950. So within the county, there's this interesting thing known as maintenance of effort, and by law, we must provide a certain level of non-deeds excise revenue to the registry. That amount increases by 2.5% a year. This year, it's $321,000, and the way that's made up is between the recording fees of $171,500, subtract that, and that's what the town would make in their county assessment. It's around $140,000 is what we actually have to, the assessment would be. We're proposing keeping it at the $170,201, which is consistent with all prior years. Just look. Projected expenses within the county administration is $258,964. This is basically legal and professional fees. There's no actual employees within that are paid from the general fund of the county. Registry of Deeds has 3 full-time employees, pays any other administrative expenses related to operations of the Registry of Deeds, and then any deeds excise or special projects, and then the $250,000, which goes towards the debt service on the building that we're in. Projected expenses are $1,003,608. Page 7 just shows a comparison between 18 and 19. Majority of the increases are within the salary and health insurance projection lines. Everything else is very similar to last year. Next steps, since this was originally intended to be adopted on the 17th and then on Monday night with before you, this is a little out of order, but the county commissioners did adopt this budget last night at their January 24th meeting, and then we're here asking you to, as the county advisory committee, to adopt this as well.
Any questions?
No.
Chris?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Noah, you're welcome.
You bet. Good evening, Noah Carberg, Airport Commission, standing in for Tom Rafter, who sends his apologies for not being here. Quickly, and I believe this is in your handout, in review of the fiscal year 2018 Airport Enterprise Fund, the airport has the following goals to, and I'm sorry, I'm referred to Jamie Sansbury for financial questions. She's our business manager who's here as well.
Jamie, welcome.
Our goals are to develop the infrastructure necessary to accommodate the increased seasonal demand. This demand occurs not only on our large air carrier ramp, but also on our general aviation ramp, specifically in the corporate sector. We're still looking to fully replace Island Airlines service to Hyannis. Rectrix Airlines has taken up some of the slack. There still is more to be made up. We're exploring alternative revenue generating options and expense reduction opportunities. We're reducing and control goals to reduce and control debt service to improve financial sustainability. We continue to seek process improvements through streamlining services and address our airport deficient capital needs. In pointing out airport initiatives and accomplishments, we'd like to note we have added frequencies by JetBlue. This would be 2 flights in the summer season from mid-June through April, 1 each of Boston and JFK. American has added Saturday service from Charlotte, and Island Shuttle has just received their certification. They're in the mold of a year-round commuter operation similar to the old Nantucket shuttle. Nantucket Airlines has leased a freight hangar, and they have purchased at least 1 aircraft, possibly more. I would have to confirm that. Our North Apron Area 3 construction project is complete. We reached a settlement agreement for a piece of SRO equipment which came with a deficiency. We believe it was a very good settlement that we reached. We've expanded the use of our VOC software platform, which processes fuel orders, fuel inventory, mapping, and performance evaluations. We've had interest from the town side, and we've hosted several town officials for reviews and data seminars on how we use that system. Our flight information display screens that go by the acronym of FIDS are installed throughout the terminal. We've developed an in-house advertising program, and the sublease of hangar number 1 has been approved with FedEx. As a side note, they call it the Amazon effect. The freight market is increasing greatly.
No, just briefly, in-house advertising, or what are you advertising?
We're soliciting advertisements for revenue, either via our FID screens or more of the traditional formats.
Okay, I thought you were doing advertising.
We do, but it's minor radio, print.
Thank you.
airport, our priorities are always safety and security. Also, quality service delivery, the term used in airports, is improving the passenger experience. Financial sustainability, improved air service, and concession development. Significant changes year to year. Rectrix airline service development, we continue to work with the Rectrix to identify other opportunities. Privileged business information right now, but it does get complex when you look into the security arrangements of potentially coming to a non-secure side ramp at our end and to a different level of security at a different location. We've engaged a parking lot operator and installed a new revenue control system. This is one for public parking systems for our paid parking lot. American Airlines has upgauged their aircraft on their routes, and we've just heard word that Delta has also upgauged their aircraft for their LaGuardia route, which will now be daily through the summer. And United has announced expanded season and conversion to jet service. United ran the Dash 8 to Newark on a 6-week season. They're 10 weeks now, and they're running a ERJ 145.
On the Delta?
Yes.
Was that an increase in frequency and the size of the plane?
The schedule is still being released. We've confirmed the LaGuardia service is an increase in frequency. The LaGuardia service was 8 weeks, Saturdays only. It now appears to be daily from June 8th through August 31st. I'm expecting they're going to reduce their JFK service to some degree, but I don't have confirmation yet from their station or their scheduler.
So when you say upgauge, that's what you're talking about, schedule, not the aircraft necessarily?
Upgauge is specific to going to a bigger aircraft. I believe that route was previously serviced by an Embraer 135 and will now be the 170, which is an increase of about 20 seats per aircraft.
Yeah, because I don't know how many seats fit on those.
Right. The ERJ 135, 145 model line, I believe, is 50 seats. The E170 is 69 to 75, depending on configuration.
Would you prepare a little better?
Yeah. So potentially 50% more passengers on each aircraft, and frequency maybe, I mean, 7 times as much. Right?
Yes, but I would wait to see. Like I said.
But they may be reducing some JFK.
Yeah, I expect that. My own personal opinion is that JetBlue is beating them out of JFK, and Delta might be talking back. One item to share, I was going to mention it earlier. The extension of that United service, we calculate that's worth an additional revenue of approximately $135,000. The 2 JetBlue flights, combined, that's a potential revenue increase of $443,000. This is information that we just became available and we just shared with Brian today.
Wow.
Correct. And as James reminded me, that hasn't made the budget draft because that is new revenue. Okay, so I get excited about air service and seats on aircraft. Key issues.
This is Stephen.
Is that I mean, obviously it's a demand. When there's the demand is there, but is there any relationship? The more service you offer, the greater the demand. I mean, does it pull additional people that might otherwise, get on 95 and go to New Bedford and get on the boat, or go to take the C Streak or whatever?
I agree. I believe you're asking this question where are we pulling from the same pie or are we increasing the pie?
No, but by increasing the amount of service, the number of seats, are you stimulating? I mean, they've done it because there's obviously demand, but by increasing, does it also stimulate its own demand because now people feel there are better schedules or there's more frequency or whatever?
I believe so. I believe so, and I believe the mechanism for that is airlines have been hesitant to expand because they have a limited data set. Their data set is only limited to what they know. They're catching on to the amount of passenger traffic, the distribution of second homeowners, And a lot of it relates to the way tickets are collected and processed. A lot of beep times when you fly on Cape Air, as you probably know, you have 2 itineraries. That ticket information isn't shared, so it appears that passengers only come from Boston, when in reality they're coming from beyond. My personal opinion, when we look at the addition of the American Charlotte service, there isn't a big second home ownership market in Charlotte. There's not really a cultural connection to Charlotte, but it's a hub for Americans, so we think they are collecting the beyond passenger market that hasn't been accounted for. So that's one reason why we're really excited about the American Charlotte service.
Are there technological advancements that explain maybe how American got that information?
Yes, and I'll try to keep this brief, but I think it's really cool. Really, Google Analytics plays a huge role in it. The data that Google can provide about where a person is coming from, what they're searching for, where their cell phone is registered. The big new thing in air service development consulting is all of these old school consultants are learning how to mine that layer and overlay it into the existing, they call it the ARC generated data, the sort of ticket itinerary process data that goes through travel agents, through Travelocity, et cetera.
Their ITA matrix software that you could have fun with online is just incredible how much you can compile and get lost in how much is a ticket to Charlotte and how many different cities can I go to. It's just incredible, the compilation. Travel agents.
Yeah. Wow.
Go to those books. Remember that originally?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Oh.
Thank you. Yeah, okay.
Keep going.
Okay, key issues. Did I mention continued ferry competition? They do a great job. Repayment to the town. That's a line item in our budget of. It's a line item in that budget. Key issues are a sustainable annual revenue base. We've been working slowly and carefully. JetBlue will be operating May through October this year. I believe when 3 or 4 years ago, they were a July through September group. Each year we sit down with them and we try to make a business case for them extending a little bit at a time. It's slow, it's conservative. Again, this is my philosophy. If you don't want to get an airline into a position where they overextend because then they overpull back. You want to walk them into increased service slowly. The other sustainable annual revenue base that we're looking at is decreasing off-season general aviation fares. We're trying to encourage people to come over. It's either a rash or a slight benefit to the airport, but if someone flies in, takes a cab, gets lunch, buys some T-shirts, this is an economic benefit. And we're modeling some different general aviation fee waivers that can be used to accommodate this.
Can you talk a little more about your general aviation fees in season and kind of how they, I think your landing and ramp fees for general aviation together are probably your biggest source of revenue, right?
I agree. If they're not the biggest, they're number 2, our general aeronautical fee revenue.
So how do you, I mean, if I were thinking about where to make money at the airport, not knowing better driving by on a Saturday or Sunday, I'd say get it from those people. So where do you stand on that? Yeah.
Okay. Technically, each user, whether it's a owner-owned Cessna 172 pilot or a NetJets, J4 out on the ramp, the rate base that you attribute has to be assessed equally across those classes. There are a few exceptions based on FAA breakout criteria. Usually, our single and light twins under 6,000 pounds have just a single dollar fee associated with their operation. But for the rest of those aircraft, it's a weight-based fee. It's a fixed fee plus a weight interaction. So I believe it's $275 per 1,000 pounds plus $30.
That's all regulatory, is that what you're saying? That's all?
Airports usually perform the rates and charges analysis based on the amount of costs that they need to recoup, cash cushion that they might want to operate on, and all of those cost centers. But you have to apply that same equation to each different operator. I can't pick out the G650 and say, your rate base is going to be more than the Phenom's rate base because it means more money to me, that would be a form of economic discrimination. And we're not allowed to do that.
I don't think the boat basin has that problem.
Right.
No.
That's too bad.
And so that was the, oh, I'm sorry, one more prepared remark. The other key issue that we keep dealing with is funding of the national system. Tom loves to explain it, so I will take a minute. You've probably all noticed when you order a ticket, when you buy a ticket online through whatever booking website, you use your purchasing, seat upgrades, checked baggage fees, all separately from your airline ticket. What the airlines have figured out how to do, and bless them, usually in the past, everything was included in the price of the ticket. That ticket was taxed at an effective rate of 6 or 7%. That money went into the federal trust fund that fed back and paid for airport capital improvements nationwide. Airlines have figured out how to take these different ancillary fees out of that ticket price, and it's tax-free revenue for them. So in real dollar terms, the effective amount of the trust fund has been declining, which means less money is available for airport capital improvements. Massachusetts used to have a very effective, very active aeronautical office, and they're still great. The staff's still there. They just don't have as much money. Through their ASMP program, they paid for a lot of things in the past, such as Massachusetts Commercial Airport runway paintings. They would do runways one year, taxiways the next, vehicle and other equipment purchases that wouldn't otherwise be FAA eligible. Those are things not only in Nantucket, but Barnstable, the Vineyard, P-Town. They increasingly have to rely on fee-generated or debt service for those.
Brian, I noticed on the, all of the budgets that medical insurance is going up 10.9%.
Based on our consultant's recommendation, where we're going now.
Question, Mr. Chairman. Is the expectation that you want me to go through the airport fund exceptions?
Yeah,
at this
let's
time?
just, or if there are any questions, I mean, you're not proposing any new positions this year. I am interpreting DNA as meaning no. Any questions on their operational?
No, you had a revolving tenant in the variety store. Right now, it's still vacant, correct?
Correct.
Is that a net savings that they're not there based on whatever percentage you would take from them, or is it a net expense that no one's there?
I'm going to try to answer this without looking at Jamie. I'll look at her. It is it's a net loss of revenue for us.
And do we, as the airport, bear any costs in any of the improvements that are going on at the other restaurant, or does the does the tenant bear those costs?
I'm not trying to be wily. I'm trying to be thoughtful because it is an open procurement, which does limit some degrees what I can say.
Is there any abatement expense associated with that project recently?
In the past lease, there was not an abatement in the last 3 or 4.
Abatement of any materials, any hazardous materials.
Specifically,
Sorry.
No, we were redoing the floor in Crosswinds restaurant. New vinyl plank tile looks great. Underneath that, we found something we suspected could be ACM, asbestos-causing material. No, we shut the job down, sent it out for testing. Testing came back negative.
In that, just to play a Q&A, if it were, would we, the airport, be responsible, or would the tenant?
I think we would have to investigate what was, hypothetically, we'd have to investigate who put down the flooring, how it was approved, and ultimately who bore primary responsibility for that.
Are we trying to utilize that space? going back to the variety store, are we trying to find a tenant?
Yes, and I believe I can direct a response about the retail space. Okay.
Yeah.
In general, the restaurant RFP lists the retail space as an alternative, as a bid alternate. The reason for that is that we've identified the community places a strong value on a year-round restaurant, and utilizing the retail space on a seasonal basis could help the restaurant operator be successful and continue to operate a year-round restaurant. So we're subrogating the retail space to the success of the restaurant.
And just a very broad question, is having those spaces idle or not, is that, does it take a lot of manpower, people power from an administrative standpoint of the airport to even deal with that, those little variety stores in the restaurant, or
there's a surprising
service?
Yeah, there's a surprising amount of effort that goes into the initial drafting, release, review, and scoring of an RFP in general. Once that process is done, however, and you've programmed the routine inspections, reviews of the lease, components such as increasing the CPI or fair market value or other openers, those, of course, they take staff time, but they do pretty much autopilot.
Okay. Thank you.
Would you agree with that? Go ahead.
During the summer, aren't we already to capacity during the prime times for like JetBlue and the rest of them? Aren't we turning people away as far as being able to process people? You said expansion by United and everybody else. Isn't that, are those more off times than, I say, prime departure and arrival times? I thought we could actually build the capacity.
I believe it's a little bit of both, and I'm trying to recall the JetBlue schedule. They've done what's known as, they've decreased their lines of service. So instead of a DC, a New York, and a Boston flight coming in all at the same time and potentially providing that passenger backlog, I'm sure Mr. Williams understands that concept, so I'm explaining it for the rest of the board. They've put them on a single line, so that same aircraft is programmed at the beginning of the day to service Boston to New York to Washington, back to Nantucket, to avoid that sort of logjam. So even though in the season JetBlue has added 2 flights by reducing the lines of business, I believe it's roughly the same amount of people. If I could I ask a clarification?
I was just trying to make a point that I always hear the selectmen say we have an airport that's underutilized and we built this big airport that's, doesn't function. In reality, in the summertime, we're actually at capacity, I believe, and it was built maybe too small.
Right. When I mentioned the passenger experience and improving the passenger experience, if you've flown through our seasonal hold room in the summer, it's crowded. The TSA line is crowded. We forecast that we're providing a level of service on the level of a D or a D minus. We're working hard through some of our projects and some of our efficiencies just to bring that up to a C level of service, which is 11 square feet per person, which isn't a 3x4 bubble or a 3x4 square for a person. Yes, it gets crowded and it gets busy, and that's an extreme challenge, especially in the peak of the summer, especially on turnover days.
A question about the budget numbers on page 23 and sort of just some of the budget trends. I guess my first short question is, do you, at this point, we've got what, 4 or 5 months left to go in the fiscal 18, fiscal 18. You still think that the 918,000 net earnings loss, net loss is a good estimate, so that you are going to consume some retained earnings to offset that?
We haven't had a chance to brief the commission yet on the new service. Sorry, I'm going to pull from another figure.
Well, because part of what I'm sort of getting at is, it looks like you're budgeting an operating loss for fiscal 18. You're budgeting a bigger operating loss for fiscal 19. I don't think that's an encouraging trend. So then I find myself wondering, well, are your almost the opposite of the debate we had in the previous presentation. Are your revenue lines sort of overly conservative? Or if the revenue lines are fair, or the revenue estimates are fair, what can expenses are growing faster than revenues. This is not a pretty picture just on those 2 years.
So we do take a very conservative line to budgeting. A lot of our revenues, all of our revenues are, back up. We have non-aeronautical revenues, but aeronautical revenues are heavily demand-based. Fuel revenue on the corporate side and landing fee revenue is very heavily based on the stock market. So we do take a conservative line because we're a market correction away from what would be some not pretty numbers. Conservative by nature, I appreciate the comment, but I don't know about overly conservative. To be fair, the service increases that I mentioned, a couple land leases that are being negotiated now, will provide an additional revenue source. But I think as a tool, I believe we are where we want to be in our sort of level of conservatism.
Well, so total expenses at total expenses $9.8 million for fiscal 19. The budget projection, we're up 3.5%. Would a fair guess that they'd be up 3%? I mean, I'm thinking. So you go out to fiscal 20, and your expense base is now 10.2 or 10.3. Can you generate 10.3 million in revenue?
I like the challenge, and I think so. One specific question for Jamie. What was our actual fuel?
Part of
we're
this
not going
is
to budget for that.
The fuel revolver and the passenger facility charge doesn't come in at the top line of revenue, and those are clearly revenue streams for them.
So what are they expense offsets?
Yeah, see, I think they're bringing them in below the line. So if they could have, for account, this is an accounting convention, I think, if I'm correct, on how we're handling the fuel revolvers.
Well, the fuel revolver,
Well, the point I'm making is that if you didn't have to handle it in the form of a revolver because of the accounting, it would be in your revenue line.
Well, the total revenue would be in there, but then you had to have 100% of the fuel in there as well. So
correct.
Right. But so the way the fuel revolver, there's two pieces to it, or two components, and I don't want to step on Jamie's toes, but there's a piece that once we hit the cap of $4 million, automatically goes into the general fund. And that last year, that brought in like $2.2 million. So basically, fuel generated $6.2 million in sales. And correct me if I'm wrong at any point, please. So $2.2 million automatically flowed into the general fund, which is calculated there. All the costs are assumed in the revolver, okay? The $400,000 from fuel, transfer from fuel revolver, is transferring in to close that delta of the 1.2. Jamie and I have actually, ironically enough, this question that you asked, Joe, is something that Jamie and I have been talking about over the last few days. And I think that some of the changes that Noah is describing, I think Jamie and I feel comfortable in future cycles can probably be built into the budget, but at a point where they're at now, it's just not reasonable to expect to build those changes in service or those leases in, even though we have an idea of what they might generate, because they're not starting at a point where we are here, and I would be loath to try to put those in and create the opposite problem of not generating revenue, because if we have a revenue deficit and we don't generate the number in the budget at the end of the year, then it has to be added into the budget in the following year by DOR before the town can set its tax rate. And if they don't have the revenues to sustain that add, they can't get to that point, then the town has to make it up on the tax rate recap. I do understand what you're saying, but if you look at fiscal 17, they budgeted to use some retained earnings and still generated a substantial surplus. So I think that the way they're doing it is fairly consistent, knowing with the fact that they have some revenue lines that are probably more in flux than, I guess you could say, Comet Water or something, but that we talked about. I think they have more, they're much more, because they're so dependent on people's ability to pick Nantucket and come to the island, I think that they're in an area where I do support the way that they're handling the budgeting of the revenue.
Okay, well, and I was misreading, and thank you for reminding about how the fuel revolver and the facility charge get added in as sort of below-the-line revenue. I guess what I was just bothering me was you have in terms of revenue from air traffic, and whether it's general aviation or commercial, you have this variable revenue stream, and it looked to me like you have an expense base that's sort of gradually swelling up. And this is an operation that cost the town money a couple of years ago, and I was just said, gee, if we have a bad, as you said, bad stock market, or everybody wants to go to Spain next year, you could have a shortfall that would happen pretty fast. So, I'm not sure there's anything you can do about it, Jamie. And I appreciate everything, but it's.
Do you know how much of your expense line is fixed versus variable, broadly? I mean, percentage-wise. Jamie?
Yeah, that's a question. I don't live in the airport numbers to that degree.
Love the accounting questions.
Well,
And of course, he knows over a short term, all
Yeah.
expenses are fixed. So.
Exactly, and over a long term, all are variable. Yeah, exactly. I know, but I just meant broadly.
So while
Let's look at a year.
Ms. Sandsbury looks that up, I know it wasn't the question that was asked, but I'll provide a sort of a process level reason that might explain that number. From ODA, we also don't know two items, how heavily the Mass DOT's ASMP budget that provided a lot of these projects in the past will be hit, and we don't know what our FAA inspector will write us up for. For example, 2 years ago, FAA inspector said, well, I know DOT didn't provide you with a grant to paint the taxiways. Taxiway echo painting is in bad shape. You need to do this year. That was something we hadn't really anticipated on. That's more of a methodological way we get into those expenses. I still don't know what that number is.
Okay, it's okay. I was just curious as to.
I will do a little bit more research and kind of try to figure it out. I haven't really thought about what's fixed. At first, I was thinking that really nothing's fixed because everything changes year over year.
I look at it as if nothing happened, what would you still have to write checks for?
Can I take
That's my.
You'd have to write a check for debt service and nothing automatically, so the debt service is automatically fixed.
Yeah, thank you.
Never goes away.
I mean,
So-
they actually are probably a pretty high fixed cost operation, because I think it's pretty hard to shed. I mean, if traffic were to fall, it's just.
And this is to Joe's point, is how much of it.
You go through all the line items in the expense budget, it's like people.
We're hazarding a guess that at least 80% of that budget is fixed.
Okay, thank you. I don't need it. You don't have to.
So, I have a question on the, on your fuel. Your actuals for 2017 show an operating, a fuel margin of 17% on $4 million in revenue. So one question is that since it says actual, I assume that's an actual revenue number. And the second part of that is the prior year, the margin was 33%, which would be much closer to what I would assume the historical number has been, as I recall. And if we can only get 17% on fuel and we can get 26% on water, maybe you guys ought to start pumping water.
If your planes run on water, you can make a lot more.
Well, I'm going to stay off the trade wind this summer, then start putting water in the tanks.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the broader question is, are you under pressure on margin on your fuel because of competition from other locations, or are you having to absorb the increase in the actual probably wholesale cost of fuel instead of passing it all along to the customer?
I believe Jamie's looking up for the margin on the fuel.
Well, are you looking at just the revolver?
Well, I'm looking on this sheet right here, Jamie. At the bottom, it says aviation fuel revolver. Actuals for 17 were.
Didn't Brian just say that there were actually more sales than that?
Yeah, to do the margin calculation, you should add the actual fuel revenue that went into the enterprise fund itself, because that comprises the total sales. I believe total sales, if you take the two of them together, were about $6.2 million, and that's the way that I would say that the calculation on your margin should be done.
So this sheet last year.
That bottom piece in the fuel only shows what was because the.
I'm just saying, last year you showed 5.3 million for actuals in 16.
Right, because we had a higher cap on the fuel revolver. We lowered it to $4 million in 17.
So, without arguing all of that, can you assure me that you're running reasonably close to 30% plus or minus on margin on your fuel sales?
Yes, and without putting that exact number, we are the sole fuel provider. It's been a very good market the last 2 years for us.
I think it's closer to 50.
Even better than that. It looks like it's about 85%
margin. 2.8 on 6.2.
Well, the costs were 3.3.
Yeah.
And their sales were 6.2.
Okay, so it's 50% margin.
Yeah. David feels better.
I do. I mean, because that's, you guys depend upon that. That's been long the calculation of how to keep this operation close to the black.
We'd be happy to circle back with that exact number. We expect it's...
No, that's fine. Other questions?
It's a silly little question. Fingerprinting services?
Yes.
You're next.
For employees.
Every airport employee goes through a criminal history record check, as does anyone else who has to access any of the secure areas.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one question.
Yeah.
And it's Cliff asked my question, or a version of it, and I want to ask it again. What's the what's the upper end limit of how many flights we can handle in this facility? I mean, that's where the growth, the revenue growth potential is. But if we're near tapped out already, how do we project significant growth in the out years?
There is a limit on that. I don't have the exact number, but very briefly, the highest number of aircraft turns that can be currently accommodated at one of our ramp parking positions, because we don't have jet bridges, is 9 turns a day. And JetBlue will be doing that 4 out of 7 days of the week in the high season. There is some ability for Delta and United to expand their service. Rough numbers, we have 25-ish total large air carrier turns scheduled a day. If we do our work and streamline all of our processes, we can maybe accommodate another 12 in a day.
So you're talking about aircraft turns, but the aircraft are getting bigger. We're gauging up, or whatever the terminology was. So the terminals don't get bigger. I've been in the airport in the summer when there's 3 pretty large aircraft all trying to get through the TSA line at the same time. If the planes get bigger or the frequency is increased, what's the limit before we say, that's great that you all want to come here, but we just can't fit you in the building?
We're working to define that limit. We've just signed a task order on us with our engineer to look at a 5th large air carrier parking position. It's technical. You get into the height of the airplane. Does it impinge on imaginary safety surfaces? What are the operational restrictions? But we're looking at that as a method to increase capacity. We're looking at ways to expand either on a seasonal nature or to reallocate space to increase the size of our hold room. We're looking at flexible spacing. We're looking at passenger traffic, and we're looking at providing a concession in post-security to make life more comfortable for them. I would say we are looking in the next 2 to 3 years at flexible spacing concepts for the terminal that ramp up for the shoulder season to accommodate that passenger demand, and then combined with combined with the fifth air carrier spot, and combined with trying to forecast these numbers with TSA to get them to dedicate more personnel. They're dedicating TSA pre-check, which should increase processing rates. There are a lot of those little things in addition with that sort of space reprogramming that will increase our capacity, but we don't have those sort of upper limit numbers yet.
So if I could kind of kick off what Steve was asking too, is it more physical constraints today on space, or is it more personnel or lack thereof constraints? Where are the largest percentage of our constraints,
Right.
physical or people?
It's equal physical constraints. The space for the airport terminal, the 2009 area renovation expanded in the existing location and left a lot of land off the table that we don't have for aircraft parking. Now, the other constraint was one that you didn't mention. It's capacity in the national airspace system. Northeast is some of the most congested in the world. Pilots are decreasing. Airlines are consolidating routes. Even if there is a potentially lucrative route for an airline, they might not do it because they might not have the equipment, they might not have the pilots. And it might be too difficult to fit that flight into a slot-limited airport's airspace.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Miller? You did mention that you've dropped the 5.5 million out of the capital, or did you not mention that?
I did not.
Supplement. Did everybody see that?
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Did we get that last night?
No, it was delivered this afternoon. So,
Maybe I heard it last night.
you heard it last night, I think, Peter, if you were
Yeah.
here. So, anyway,
What's today?
anything else for Noah? Noah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank
Is
you.
Capcom looking at the second airport?
Yeah, we're going to start with water.
Scotts Cove?
Any other,
Just dress the harbor.
any other business we can, since it sounds like everybody listened to the selectmen's meeting last night.
I didn't. I've heard a few different recaps, but I'd love your opinion.
I'd like to hear what you're hearing.
Well, I can give you what I heard from Don and from Chris, but I think you've heard those.
Okay.
So maybe, what was the upshot? So the board of selectmen are.
Well, I think Chris says it best. It was what's on offer is a political solution.
Right.
Since I can't pledge you all to vote in a certain way, I would implore you to do so. What was on offer was $300,000 and a solid commitment that they will have a plan with a commitment from me that we, the Finance Committee, won't move the goalposts on what is in the plan every time they come in front of us.
Maybe you could barter a position on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for a member of the FinCom.
I think we could probably do that, because I think part of the discussion I had off the record, in touching base with people, was the suggestion that perhaps they just don't have the structure to be able to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
And I think there's some recognition that that may be the case. So I did speak with Brian Sullivan about this in the afternoon on Tuesday, and I spoke with Dawn, and then I spoke again with Dawn on yesterday morning. And then some of you heard the conversation last night.
So
The selectmen supported 4-1, reducing the ask to $300,000, and while it won't show up in the article, a lengthy discussion about getting something written down about what they ought to be doing with their money, a plan.
So what was, Sully's one member of is it a board, committee of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund group. I assume he was horrified because they have a strict budget. They needed all that money, and now they have less. So now they're not going to be able to accomplish their, was that his reaction?
No.
So now they had $748,000 that they wanted to spend for land acquisition, and now they're going to have $448,000 and no ability to obtain financing. So, I mean, that seems like an amount of money that might as well be a single dollar, because you're not going to be able to go out and get anything.
I think there's a recognition that until such time as they truly figure out whether they have the structure to actually be in the game of acquiring land, which may require a dedicated person, staff person they don't have, or a dedicated person in the town, or some articulated way to identify parcels ahead of, you and your investors, and me and my investors, and Chris and his investors, so that they can be in the game, that they're, short of throwing copious amounts of money at every deal, that's probably where they're going to be.
Right.
However, there are clearly other strategies that they can employ, and that's part of thinking through this process to help with the affordable housing. I mean, it's not an all or nothing. They have to acquire the land in order to accomplish their mission.
It sounds like, and hopefully they'll take this, as tacit direction to change their strategy, not try to acquire land that they don't have the personnel to develop, and continue with the down payment assistance and other programs like that.
I mean, one of the selectmen in my conversation with them, not Don, but another member of the board, pointed out that they clearly have enough money. Remember, they're getting another $400,000 from CPC. Mm-hmm. They clearly have enough money to buy options on property, put down payments on property, and then come and seek money from the town in order to. And if you figure that we probably go about every 6 months and we have a town meeting, we're not. I think there's some sense that they're not as hamstrung in how they go about acquiring land as they might suggest by not having a pot of money. So
I think the point that you raised just about it being a citizens volunteer group puts them in a position of, well, this one's going to do it. And therefore, it just sits because no one is. So even if, from just the discussion we had, it would make sense that they allocated some of their funds to hire someone, even on a 2-year contract, until they know if the law is going to get passed, to say, I can put together, here's the 10 steps we want to do, and if we have this much money, we can do this, and then we can do this, and then we can do this. But a person needs to do the work, and I didn't get a sense from the discussion we had with the group that anyone was going to raise their hand and step forward and do that.
That all, to me, that just articulates why they need to think this through and get it put down. So it's because right now they don't, in my view, they don't have the structure where they could access property and the like. So,
David, if I could ask you, and maybe Brian, you can help. How involved will the Finance Committee be, if at all, on being advocates for the solution for the sewer break in the project that's about to unfold? Is this committee going to be involved at all?
I, on behalf of the committee, I have not been asked what our. I don't even know if it's been under discussion. I think we await most everybody else to.
Correct. But I love planning ahead.
I know. Excuse me. So, I think if people were still there during the warrants, there will be a debt exclusion question put on the ballot in April relative to potential funding, as we're still a couple weeks away from even beginning at earliest, excuse me, the investigative exploratory assessment work to know the true extent of what may or may not need to be done. So last night, the selectmen voted, we had drafted a ballot question, which was approved by bond council, excuse me, to put a debt exclusion on the warrant. If the costs rise to the level of needing to borrow, the next question that would have to be discussed, which was brought up by the town manager last night, is what allocation is going to be put where, or so much as is there going to be a suggestion that the general fund assume it, which is why we have put a ballot question forward in the event that that's decided that, or there's an allocation between sewer and general fund. So if it rises to the level of needing to borrow that, then my anticipation is that at this point, because of the timing of the warrant and everything, that we would put those motions into Article 10 and 13, or 10 or 12, or whatever, the two capital articles, if we were getting to costs that would require us to borrow. If it's a simple repair, then we may just be able to fund it. Then we could fund it out of retained earnings or something, which would then be a transfer of retained earnings in the article transfers that are done in the warrant. So hopefully, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we would be, you never know, we would act on both of them, but that's...
I think there's a meeting upstairs. I gotta go and look it up.
So,
Can I
just, yeah,
offer a couple of thoughts about
please.
that? One was, and it goes along the same lines as maybe the point you were making, is, I mean, there was a lot of discussion last night about this is happening at the 11th hour, and that's come up a lot of conversations lately, and I don't know if that's a function of our town meeting form of government at this point, that everyone feels that way, or if so just something to think about, but I have sort of the same reaction. Well, it's the 11th hour implies you're about to make a decision that's going to screw something up that we have planned. But I don't think this decision, whether it be 300 or 0, is going to change anything that happens over the next year. So I don't think there is any really 11th hour element of this. And speaking for this board, we got it one day, we sent the message back the next day. So it may be part of the process. It wasn't anything we waited to ambush anyone on at this board. The other point, I think, was another one that Stephen was making, I think is important for us to reinforce. I think there was a lot of dialogue last night. This is us in the town pulling back from housing. This is us in the town pulling back from not housing. Right? I mean, there are a whole bunch of things that this town is doing related to affordable housing, a whole bunch of things a lot of people in this town are doing to affordable housing. And I don't think the Finance Committee's position, no matter where it ends up on this, is one, and I think you made this point, David, of pulling back from housing. This is really specific to this funding request and what can be done with this money otherwise, rather than having it sitting somewhere not doing anything.
Thank you. I did not respond to the seems like 11th hour, partially because people are getting fed up with the discussion. But this has been an unusual year because first of all, capital usually comes to us in December. Recall, so we're over a month late on capital. The second is the selectmen missed their meeting on when they usually approve the warrant, so the warrant was out of cycle, and I think and I'm trying to remember when we did affordable housing last year, but we may have had affordable housing in December as well. So there's been, people are been behind. I mean, I think we've actually had our schedule here for quite a while. I mean, so we're not behind, but we have to wait, obviously, and cajole to get people to do stuff.
Yeah, two components to that. I'm not sure that it was a comment on our scheduling, which I think is fine, but also the 11th hour implies that you've created some level of uncomfortability that I don't see where that uncomfortability is.
No, I agree with Chris's observations.
Good. Thank you. Before we adjourn, so Saturday, we're all set on Saturday. Last year we did a great job of staying on schedule. I would urge us to stay on schedule. So, if I will work hard to make sure that we do stay on schedule. Let's ask good, insightful questions, and I think we'll have a good day on Saturday. So,
Peter, what's the protein?
I can tell you what I'm having at Cobley.
Oh, be here, I forgot.
Got another meeting too.
We will fend for ourselves.
So anyway, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned.
Aye. Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.